Hello beautiful soul. In this video I want to talk about how I learnt I wasn't seeing people clearly, I was seeing my past. And the first thing that I wanted to talk about is that my system was reacting before I did. So we often, and our bodies often, interpret people and the world that we're in based on past experience. So that's why when we meet some people, they feel familiar or they feel unsafe or we feel like something feels like before. And it's not the person, it's our history being projected into our current reality, into the present. If we have old wounds there that we haven't healed, our nervous system often responds. So knowing this about myself, I know that if my nervous system is reacting in a certain way, and I feel unsafe for some reason, perhaps I am unsafe, and it's definitely, I think, prudent to heed that warning because sometimes we just are in a situation that doesn't feel entirely safe and it's important to listen to that. However, it may or may not be correct, and it's really important to reflect on the situation, on that dynamic, to actually determine if it was a projection based on old wounding, or if there was actually something about the pattern, like a repeating pattern of choosing the same toxic people to surround ourselves with. That would be something to be mindful of, to always regulate first and then reflect on the situation and determine if it was just a nervous system reaction to some old wounding and past negative experiences, or if our nervous system was just telling us something that we probably needed to see about that toxic pattern. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is I learned that my sensitivity made me absorb more than what was actually there. So when we feel deeply, we also interpret situations deeply. So we can see beyond the surface level. This is why I would get stuck in these dynamics and situations where I'd be overextending my empathy. I'd be looking at that person beyond their behavior and seeing potential, seeing perhaps their inner child that was wounded and understanding that deeper level of why they were behaving in that way. And having patience and probably staying in situations for too long when the reality of the situation would be perhaps that person did have inner child wounding. Perhaps they did have some amazing potential and the dynamic wasn't toxic all the time. It was only sometimes. Despite all those things perhaps being true, the reality could also have been that the person had no desire to change or grow or improve or heal. And so their behavior would always be that toxic cycle, that toxic dynamic. So it's really important to understand that we can be sensitive, we can be empathetic without actually staying in a situation, trying to fix people, extending that understanding and care and patience beyond a level that's healthy for us. Just because we can understand someone deeply and we want what's best for them doesn't mean that remaining in an unhealthy situation and dynamic is good for us, and I think to do so is abandoning ourselves. So another thing that I realized is that my first reaction for a really long time wasn't the truth. It was just that projection that I was talking about earlier. And so part of healing, part of learning and growing and understanding is that projection that we do onto others. And this is something that I've been delving into more deeply and just reflecting on, like, why do we even do this? Why do we project things onto people? And it's because we cannot understand the world other than through our own self. We can't necessarily know what other people's experiences are other than experiencing those people through ourselves. And so that's always the place that we start from when we're interacting with the world, when we're interacting with people. Everything is a projection of ourselves until we have that understanding and we can remove ourselves from that situation and look at things from a higher perspective and more from our logic. And so when I was younger, I found it really hard to take accountability. I would project blame onto other people. Everything was always someone else's fault. I wasn't able to actually see my part in that situation or whatever had occurred. I would, if I reacted or retaliated in some way, in an unhealthy way, I would victim blame. That person deserved it in some way. Like, these are all really toxic behaviors. And part of taking accountability is taking accountability for our part of a problem. Part of this projection issue is, even if we feel like we're projecting onto someone or something or a situation, it's not reacting with that projection. It's about holding that in past the initial reaction, reflecting on it, understanding, like, is this actually a projection of something within myself, or am I interpreting the situation correctly and the other person has crossed a boundary or harmed me in some way? And so my first reaction is something I always question now. I make a lot of space and time to reflect on anything that comes up that is dysregulating. And I look for the reasoning for that. I look for the evidence. I reflect on how could this dysregulation relate to my past and historical wounding, and usually I'm able to see the situation clearly. The fourth thing that I wanted to mention is that I learned that I was seeing people through the lens of my past. And so I grew up in chaos. Any chaotic people felt normal to me. They felt healthy when they weren't. I grew up with a lot of criticism, and so neutrality ended up feeling like rejection. I grew up with emotional inconsistency, so that meant that intensity felt like connection when it wasn't. Intensity is not intimacy. So my past became a filter, and I wasn't actually aware of this, and that is why I was continually stepping into these unhealthy patterns, these unhealthy relational dynamics, and that's just what's going to happen. We keep repeating the same cycles until we learn the lesson. And it makes sense, right? If we've been conditioned in this way through our childhood to see certain things in a certain way and connect with things because that's familiar, we're going to keep doing that until we recognize this unhealthy pattern, the red flags that we're experiencing, and stop choosing that. That is how we level ourselves up. And so when I started realizing these things, I started realizing the illusions that I was in, the ways I was gaslighting myself into believing that things were not as they actually were, and started looking at things from another perspective, challenging my own thoughts, beliefs, actions, reactions, all of those things, and understanding that everything is a projection until we realize that. So I really hope that this has helped someone. I love you, bye.